This is ContactTalkRadio.com. Consciousness in action. And you are taking action into your consciousness by tuning into Contact Talk Radio.
And on TuneIn.com, Ping.fm, and UpSnap Mobile.
Contact Talk Radio.
Welcome to Life Mastery with Todd Allen, the talk radio show that dives into the science of higher consciousness. Join Todd and his guests weekly at 10 a.m. Pacific Time and learn how to live a peaceful life with intentional mastery. Enjoy a survey of inspiring topics such as abundance, intention, health, manifestation, love, and transformation. It's all right here. Leading authors, speakers, coaches, entrepreneurs with stories and messages to support your well-being, let alone your most evocative dreams.
Hey, it's another groovy day, like I started to say already once today. And that's because I make it that way. Hey, when I get up in the morning, I already decide that it's a groovy day. And before my feet hit the ground, I'm taking off into a groovy day. If something changes or something happens, I just have to think back to starting it out groovy, and everything turns out groovy. It never fails. When I go to bed, I think back and everything was just as it was supposed to be. Groovy. As always, I like to get myself centered and situated before the show, get connected. And if we just take a minute and think about what it is you connect to that gives you power. It could be God, it could be Allah, it could be the dude, it could be the tree outside your office or outside your window, the doorknob, whatever it is. Think about that and focus on it for a minute. And take in a deep breath. All the way down deep, deep, deep. And let that breath out with just a big ah. And just let your essence flow up through your heart center, out of your throat chakra, out of your speaker box, and out into the universe. Connect to that which gives you power. Let's do that one more time. In with a deep breath, but this time think about those dreams, visions, and goals. What is it you aspire to be, do, and have? Fixate on that for just a minute, taking a deep breath. And again, just let that breath out with a ah. And let those dreams, visions, and goals flow out of your speaker box, out into the universe. And now's the time you think about providing the universe the opportunity to make those come true for you, because it will. Just chin up, tail out from between your legs, and look for those opportunities because they're coming your way. Yay. As always, I have my co-host with me today, riding shotgun, big smile. She's kind of looking like she's on the farm today.
Thanks a lot.
No, I'm just kidding. She does love animals, though, so
Hi,
she
y'all.
could be a farm girl. Hi, Jackie. How are you today?
Should I talk like this today if I'm down on the farm?
I don't know. Can we do that anymore? Is that making fun of people, or is that just copying people?
I don't know.
It sounded fun, though. How are you today, my friend?
That's actually my natural sound because I'm from West Virginia. That's where I was born.
That's right. See,
I can legitimately talk that way, although it's been sort of normalized out of me, so to speak.
Civilianized.
Yeah, so I'm good.
How are things at the Speak Feed Lead?
Well, Speak Feed Lead, we're coming along. We are planning for more classes in the fall, and some schools are going to be back in session in August, and some of them actually started already. So some of those classes will begin soon, and I'm making a big moving across town to a new apartment. And, downsizing. We've been empty nesters now for, 12, well, actually more like 16 years since our daughter got married. And it's about time we just kind of simplify a little bit. So my husband and I are selling a lot of furniture and some of the collectibles we've had for years, which is a little bit hard to do. You know,
All the
when you
stuff
have
you've been packing around. Yeah.
sentimental value with things, it's hard to let them go, but it also feels a little bit freeing
It
to
is
be able to let
it's a
those
spiritual
go.
experience. I've come to understand that. I remember one time I filled up 2 dumpsters when I moved from the farm to the city, and I just threw stuff, but I think back today, oh, I had that. I threw that
Yeah.
away. So it's kind of crazy, but it was very freeing because I didn't have all this stuff that I'd been packing around since the Marine Corps in high school, and it was all just gone. And now I could get new stuff.
Yeah. Well, the one big challenge is, as you know, my husband and I have co-produced 6 musical stage shows, and we have a lot of
All the
props
scenery.
and sets in our garage.
Yeah.
And we're not gonna be able to take those into an apartment with us, so we're trying to figure out where to store those things. It will likely be this is my studio, and his studio is actually right next door to me, and he's got some space there, so we might have to store those sets at his studio.
Yeah, and you don't really want to put it in storage because when will you ever use it again? And then you have that monthly expense, and
Exactly.
you never recover that. It's crazy. Oh yeah, I'm pretty hip.
Yeah. So
Well,
all of those little things, but it'll work out.
It always does if you think about it being a groovy thing.
Yeah.
I guarantee.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited. Last night I was here late with a meeting, and I got to thinking, it will be so nice when I can walk 100 feet that
Home.
way and be home, than to have to get in my car and drive for half an hour. It's just going to be a big difference.
Well, you spend a lot of time there anyway at your
That's the
studio.
thing. And with gas so expensive now, it's going to be exciting to just be able to walk. Everything that we need, generally speaking, is within walking distance. And this is a brand new high-rise apartment building. So we'll be the first people that have ever lived there. And, it'll be fun. It's an adventure.
An adventure.
After 38 years of marriage, we're finally having an adventure.
A micro journey is what I would call that. A micro journey. Well, cool. I want to remind our listeners that today's show page is at www.lifemasteryradio.net or .com, whichever one you prefer. You can go there, and any links that we talk about with our guest today will be there. Jackie's book is there. My book is there. And you can sign up for our newsletter. Our newsletter goes out once a week. It highlights who's been on the show, who's coming on the show. And Jackie always writes a really cool blog post about the show that we just did. And all that's right there. You can sign up for it, and you get it in your email every week. And that way you can stay up to date with all things Life Mastery. We talk to some really cool people all the time. Every week we have a really cool guest. Yeah.
It just reiterates to me that everybody has a story that can change another's life.
Yeah, that's so
literally speaking. I tell that to my youngest students all the time, that your story matters. Even though you might only be 10 years old and you don't feel like you've had a lot of life experience, you've had enough experience that you've got something to teach and inspire someone with. And it just it confirms that to me every time we have a guest, because there might be a same theme with different guests, but their stories are always so different that you learn something new with each one.
And somebody out there has the same experience or part of the story that you can inspire. And I'm sure our guest today will tell us that has happened. And our guest today is Sabine. Help me out with this, Sabine. Is it Gedeon? Gedeon. Sabine Gedeon. After years of struggle and hurt, Sabine was prepared to take the pills she had in hand. But before she did, she expanded her pain and rage at God and told him that, in fact, if he was real and didn't want me to move forward with my plans, that I needed him to prove it to me. Talk about a demand. And in the next moment, she says, God himself showed up in her bedroom and wrapped his arms around her. Sabine knows firsthand the amount of faith and courage it takes to break away from the norm and step into something new or bigger than yourself. Using her personal experience as a benchmark, She hopes to help lead millions of others through their unique paths of purpose, impact, prosperity, and legacy. And she has written a book, and that book is called Transformed: The Journey to Becoming. Good day, Sabine. Welcome to the show. How are you? Look at that smile. Just opened right up.
Hi,
All that
Todd
light.
and Jackie. Good morning to you as well. So happy to be here.
It is
We are
delightful
happy to have you. Yeah. And what a
Amazing.
story. Your book is just amazing. You know, I wrote some things in my book as well. And people, I'm just going to start out with this question. Some people came up to me and said, how could you put that stuff in your book? Aren't you embarrassed? Aren't you? Do you get that?
Actually, no. And
Really?
and believe it or not, that was my biggest fear or biggest concern or biggest worry in releasing it. Like, will people believe me? Will the shame and the guilt and everything take over? But yet people were actually very empathetic. They were very compassionate. And in many instances, people came up to me and was just like, you know what? Thank you for sharing that story because, something happened to me and I've never shared it with anyone. Or, I've experienced something similar. So in many ways, at least for the ones who spoke with me directly, it gave them permission to, share their own stories or at least confront their own situations.
And Sabine, I feel like I want to give you a hug
Oh, I
because
receive it.
because as I'm reading your story, I'm thinking, gosh, she could be writing my story.
Mhm.
We really are sisters from another mister, so to speak, in that so many similarities, and I could feel the pain and suffering that you were describing in each step along the way. Actors were a little bit different, of course, but very similar upbringing. And so I'm just grateful to you for sharing your story, as painful as it was. It's healing at the same time to get those words out there and actually voice all of those things you've held in for so long. So I
Yeah.
appreciate that you've done that.
Oh, absolutely. And thank you so much for sharing that with me. I think that's the beautiful part of it, right? As human beings, we're so connected on so many different ways. And even with the bad stuff, right? The good stuff, it's kind of like, oh, it's easy to celebrate. But even with the bad stuff, the fact that one person's story isn't just one person's story, it's multiple people's stories. And essentially we were able to comfort and connect and bring hope to others every time we do tell our stories, regardless of how ugly it may be or how shameful you may think that it is. So thank you for sharing that with me, Jackie.
Yeah, oh, you're welcome.
What would you say? Well, let me start out this way. Did you were you surprised at how freeing it was to put it on paper? Just like Jackie described, she's got a lot of stuff to get rid of and she's looking forward to that. I don't think she realizes how freeing it's going to be. Were you shocked at just how life opening up that it was? That makes sense.
Yes. However, freeing was not the immediate feeling that I felt. It's
I
like
get
the
it.
aftermath and the look back. But it was actually even though granted, through years of just healing and strengthening my relationship with God, I had gotten to the point where like there are parts of me that had been healing, and I thought, oh, okay, I'm gonna write this book. And so I'm already healed, so it should be easier. And it was just like, no, there were like so many layers to it. So it was actually a very grueling, emotional process in the moment. But I can tell you that that day that I hit publish on Amazon, it was just like a deep sigh and a deep breath of like, it's finished, like
Yeah,
it's done, it's out there.
that's cool. And there really is such a healing relationship that's different from telling your story to actually writing your
Hmm.
story. And in fact, when I was going through my healing process and sought counseling, I was told, don't use the keyboard, don't use a typewriter, actually write longhand because That way, there's this communication that happens from your brain and your heart to the hand that is emptied through the pen or the pencil and leaves all of that there. And it's a way to kind of get all that out. So I'm sure that you found that to be the case. And we seem to be starting off in the middle of your story here. And so our audience is probably going, what are they talking about?
We're enticing them.
That's right. And you have two really strong metaphors that you use throughout your book. One is of Joseph of Egypt. You use his story as a metaphor for your own. And then you also use the transformation of a butterfly to represent your own transformation. So I'll let you choose how you'd like to begin the use of one of those metaphors for our audience to have a better understanding of what we're talking about in your book today. What do you think?
So it's funny, and thank you for pointing that out. So I think if you look at the two metaphors, like ideally the caterpillar turning into the butterfly, right? That's the external stuff. That's what people see, and that's what people witness. Well, maybe not when they're in the cocoon, but you know, the pain and the suffering and everything else around Joseph in his life. That was the internal turmoil. So, you know, I was able to, well, I can't take credit for that, but God led me to write it in such a way where, you know, we could see, we can have a visual externally and also internally. So basically, I'll use the caterpillar one, since that's so easy for people to understand. If you're not familiar, the story of Joseph in Egypt is in the Bible in Genesis. But with the caterpillar, you know, we often see the butterfly and we're amazed and we're like, oh my gosh, it's so beautiful and it's just so pretty. But rarely do we really stop to think about the process that the caterpillar had to go through to get to that place. And so in coupling, you know, from the time the caterpillar goes into the cocoon, is completely destroyed, and then comes out into that beautiful thing, I share about my story of, you know, my earlier, I guess, experiences here on earth. And how, you know, there was a lot of destroying from the inside in many different instances, in many stages of my life. So essentially, I do believe that we all go through that transformation process multiple times in our lives. But for me, my first big transformation happened, and Todd talked about it a little earlier, is when I had gotten to the point of, I think I was about 25, where, you know, the life that I had built and created all came crashing down. And I know that's so dramatic, but pretty much I got a mirror put in front of me of my life. And in that moment, I didn't like what I saw. I hated, in fact, what I saw. And, you know, in that moment, the thing that was most prevalent was the pain that I was in, based on, you know, things happening at work, relationships, so on and so forth. And I wanted to end my life. And in doing so, I set out my plan. You know, I don't know who plans, but anyways, I set out my plan. I had my conversation with God, and in that conversation, he completely transformed things for me in the way that I saw myself. I didn't believe that I had a purpose. I didn't believe that I had a reason. With all the pain that I had endured and experienced, it just felt like there was really no reason for me to stay here. I didn't love myself. People around me, you know, had demonstrated that they didn't love me. And so I needed that reason. And he, you know, him showing up in my bedroom floor that day gave me the hope that, yes, I had a purpose. And then that's when my transformation began. So I had to go backwards through so many years of pain, you know, starting with sexual abuse, actually before that, starting with the relationship with my mother, starting with sexual abuse, starting with, you know, all types of stuff that had happened along the way to get me to that point that I was at 25. And so my transformation was almost reversed. But since then, every single transformation after that has been, you know, very, very similar to that breaking and that destroying of the internal that happens with the caterpillar to turn into, or to transform into, that beautiful butterfly.
You know, in your book, I thought it was really interesting, your struggle with the R word. and in working with your therapist, how she was able to get you to realize how to deal with that or how to acknowledge that. Maybe you could go through that a little bit. I don't know if that's a touchy subject for you, but I thought that was a huge revelation.
Yeah. So the word is rape. And I think to this day, I still have a little bit of challenge saying it. Like I'll use sexual abuse in the stead. And part of that really, the difficulty with that word is not necessarily the word itself, it's the meaning.
The meaning behind it.
And so for me, at the time, prior to meeting with the therapist, I didn't see it as that because I felt like I believed as a kid even that I was a willing participant.
Mm.
And it can't
Even though
be,
you were 7 or 8 or
yeah,
10 or
yeah,
something like that. Yeah.
yeah. So I can't, it can't be that if I was a willing participant. And there was no, there was no repercussion. There was nothing, right? Like, so all of the evidence when you watch TV or when you watch, SUV or something like that, right? Someone does something like that. Like there's a trial, there's something like there's some punishment and the person has some resolve, but I never had that. And so as I was sitting there, I was probably about 26, 27 at that point. This was after my my suicide attempt. As I was talking to her, I was just like, something inside of me, it doesn't feel right. And I had obviously dealt with depression before. Didn't know that that's what it was, but I had dealt with depression before, and I was feeling like something was off, something wasn't right. And, I reached out to my local EA or the EAP at my job, and they were like, oh, okay, you could get these counseling sessions. Never been through to a counselor before. And as we started talking, she just started asking me questions about my childhood. And these are thoughts that, of course, you have, and then you kind of put them away, right? They weren't conversations that I was having with my friends. Like it happened. We don't talk about it. And when I think about it, I put it away in my, safe little box. And she's asking questions, and, I start to tell her, what took place. And I don't know what questions she asked to like elicit that kind of information from me, but
that's what they do. That's what they're trained to do.
Good at her job. So as we're talking and she asks and I explain, okay, well, this is what happened. But then I vividly remember saying, but what did I said something to the effect of, but I participated, like, but I was okay with it. And it was just, and she, she took that moment and she paused. She's like, wait a minute. She was like, I want you to hear what you just told me that you said, right? You just told me that your cousins and their friend, right? And I think she may have used the word molested at that time. And in the beginning. And I was like, yeah, but like it's what we did, right? Like this is me as a grown adult justifying this. And then she was like, okay, I want you to describe what happened. And of course I described what happened. And that's when she said, okay, so you were raped. And I was like, well, no, I mean, yeah, no, that's not what it was. And she was like, okay, why are you having so much trouble with that word? And again, it went back to because I knew what was happening. And she was like, okay, if a 13-year-old who was, mentally retarded or handicapped, if this happened to her, what would you say? Like, what would you call it? And I was just like, well, I would definitely call that rape, like with such confidence. And she was just like, okay, do you know that your mind at the time was as developed as that? And that's when it just hit me. It was just like, I was so confident almost in my belief about like what it meant and who I was and what my participation was, that I didn't even think that, ma'am, you're 6 or 7, like your mind wasn't even developed enough to process what was happening. And that's when I kind of had to take that step back and acknowledge that. The one thing that I will say today, which is why I still hesitate to acknowledge or embrace the word, is I never want that to be my identity.
Yeah.
And that's not a dig on anyone else, who've experienced that. but I just don't ever want that to be my identity. It is something that happened to me. It is something that I dealt with and that I have healed from, but it's not who I am.
Right. But I can imagine there are many people that identify with that same scenario. I'm sure you've heard of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, the whole concept, and I think that that's what's been in my mind for all these years. But the whole concept of, oh, a rape victim or a survivor or anything of that, like that, it does not sit well with me.
Yeah. I get it.
Yeah.
Do you think a little bit of that might be because there's still guilt that you feel? Because if you grew up for so long feeling like you took part in it, or that you were okay with it, there could be some deep-seated guilt that you're still feeling over that. And also, when you look at the perpetrators of this, they were young boys.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't even adults either, right?
Yeah.
So they were participating in something as well, and yet they may not have been able to understand the full, I don't know, the problematic situation that was creating and what was happening there. So, it's sad to think that children, all of you as children, were affected by that in one way or another. All of you were in some way victims.
Yeah.
All of you were perhaps in some way perpetrators. All of you came away from that different, and so that's hard to wrap your head around, because there's so many dynamics there. And could that be part of that hesitancy from you?
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. So as I was writing the book, right, each chapter would be write a chapter, bawl my eyes out, and be done for the rest of the day. And, as I was sharing or, listening back. So you had talked about the writing so that your mind, so I typed it on Word, and then I had the little audio voice, like, read it back to me. And so for me, I don't believe that I'm still holding on to guilt. What I took away from that process when I wrote the book, or the revelation that I got, was in order for them to do that, someone did that to them.
Right.
And so I don't know how, maybe it's compassion, maybe it's empathy, but I found peace in knowing and understanding, like, this wasn't this wasn't a malicious thing, but I actually felt, and this is part of my forgiveness process, but I felt deep empathy for them, because I understood at this stage as an adult that wasn't something that they just woke up and said, let me try this. Right. And so for me, again, I don't think either one of us are victims, right? These are situations that took place, but I don't necessarily carry guilt, and I don't carry shame. And in fact, I carry a lot of, like I said, empathy and compassion towards them. Now, I can forgive and not necessarily need to have a relationship.
Right.
But nonetheless, that's where my stance is when it comes to that at this point.
Yeah.
And breaking the cycle. That cycle's now been broke, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And you brought it into the awareness of other people so that cycle can be broke. So it's very empowering, very powerful.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Well, and from day one of your life, Sabine, it was less than idyllic, right? So, you came into the world likely feeling unaccepted or unwanted to some degree, even though as an infant, you certainly don't know what that means. But I'm learning more and more all the time that those emotions that are happening around us affect everything internally with us. And so you've come to understand some things about your own mother as well throughout this transformation process too. Can you feel compassion for her?
Oh, I do. I absolutely do. I think, well, again, with everyone, right? My healing process starts with forgiveness. And for me, there's the logical and the feeling side of me. So I have to understand, like, why, what would prompt, or, what would motivate someone to behave in a particular way. And then, especially with her, all throughout my life, the relationship that we had, it was always bad. Like I was always like, I don't understand why you treat me like this. And the messages that I would get from like my father, my siblings, and even like aunts and uncles would be, oh, she's your mother. You know she loves you. And they were contradictory to what I was actually experiencing, but that would
Right.
always be the message. And I remember it was probably about when one of my aunts passed away back in 2011, like in my darkest moment, another dark moment, because it was the first time I was losing a close loved one. She was being herself, granted, but it was just like I didn't have the walls up to deal with her at that point. And she said a few things that were very hurtful, and I remember my sister going to say, oh, but she's your mother, and I had to say, stop, because those messages are the messages of love equals hurt, love equals pain, love equals disrespect, are the messages that I've carried that have led me through this life of pain. And so I understand that she is who she is, but I also had to get to a place where I was just like, okay, she is who she is, but that doesn't mean that it's love. And she is who she is, and that doesn't mean that because she's my mother, right? That just like I wouldn't allow anyone else to be abusive towards me, just because she's my mother doesn't mean that it's okay.
Right.
And so with her, even to this day, we have this relationship, if you will. Her background, and this is me suspecting, it's probably very similar to mine, right? Again, you repeat the cycles. So I imagine that she was treated as the black sheep, that she was treated as the unwanted one, and she just repeated a cycle with me that, you know,
People
let
who
us.
was it? We had a guest a couple of weeks ago or several weeks ago that said hurt people hurt people, right? And so when you, as an adult, there might be a point, as you have discovered, Sabine, that you can look back and you say, my mother was not a very nice person to me. She must have been in a lot of pain. And my grandmother was not a very nice person to me. She must have been in a lot of pain. My siblings treated me horribly. They must have been in pain. And if we can view life a little more with that lens, it can, as you have come to discover, it can provide some compassion for others. Despite what they have done to us, those experiences have brought us where we are today. We are who we are because of those experiences, good and bad. Thankfully, you did not make a different decision on that particular day, that God did step in and saved you and gave you another option. And that was because likely your purpose was to write this book and to share your message so that someone else could be inspired with that. So if you could go back, though, what could have been said to you, or what could have been done, or what actions could have been done that might have provided a feeling of love or belonging or connection to you?
Great question. So as an adult, I've come to learn that, the 5 love languages, right? My love language is, or top 2, they're even words of affirmation and quality time. So, I'm a very verbose person, if you could not tell. And I imagine I know I was very much so that way as a kid. And so, hearing words of affirmation, words of I'm proud of you, to this day, I'm 39 now, and she's never told me she loved me. So, it's those types of things, right? Like reassuring the person that they're okay. Whereas the messages were always what's wrong with you, what you're not doing and how you're not enough and how you're whatever. And so that, even to this day, I'm breaking the cycle of those messages, as I call it, my inner critic. And it's because the messages that I did get were negative messages versus reaffirming or loving or compassionate messages.
Wow. So has there been a transformation there then in changing the way you think about things?
Oh, absolutely. I realized that I have to first give me, on so many different levels, but I have to give me the things that I'm not getting externally, right? Like no longer, there was a point where like all of that bitterness was created because it was kind of like, it's not fair. I should have gotten this. I should have gotten that. Whereas it's kind of like, I'm going to give to myself the things that, you know, I didn't get or that I would want people to give to me, because you teach people how to treat you, right? And so if you can't treat yourself well, just like if you don't love yourself, how can you expect other people to love you? So for me, it's been this journey of really loving me, accepting me, giving myself grace, not being so hard on myself, right? Like not feeding into that inner critic, allowing myself to make mistakes, to stumble, to fall, and then getting back up and saying, okay, baby girl, you got this tomorrow. It's just reaffirming myself. And I do believe that as I've, you know, been on this path of doing it for myself, I've been able to attract, I guess is the best way to put it, or to, you know, surround myself with people who do the same without it having to be like a fight or a struggle. I have people now reflecting back to me what I am reflecting to myself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. That's the way it works.
Yeah.
So transform. You've become transformed. You had this experience. You wrote about it. Who is Sabine today? What are you about today?
Today, I'm still about transformation because I realize two things. I realize that transformation and purpose aren't like these one-time events, right? We are we are always transforming. Every new stage in life, every new opportunity is an opportunity to go into what I call the transformation chamber and to come out on the other side a different person. And I remember, you know, I thought purpose was the static thing because, as you know, it was like in my deepest, darkest moment, I asked God for purpose, and it was just like, okay, he uncovered this thing, and I'm like, okay, this is my purpose. This is the thing. And then it'd be like, no, actually, this is just part of the journey. Go into the transformation chamber and then come out. And then it'd be like, okay, this is my purpose. So I am, as Sabine today is forever evolving. Sabine today is curious, and excited, and you know, I call this a journey because it is a journey. I used to think that life was like this you know, vertical thing that you just move and you climb up and you climb up until you've climbed and then you die. But now I realize that no, it's a pathway, it's a journey. There's some winding roads, there's some ditches.
There's some Y's in the road too, my friend.
There are valleys, there are mountains, there are snakes, there are all these things, and we are walking through it. And each space or each time that we get to stop and take a rest, one important thing I've learned, because I've always been trying to climb that ladder, is when I get those periods on my journey to rest, to go ahead and do that, to just rest and to just be, because I need that rest for the next leg of the journey that's ahead of me.
So how are you help? Oh, go ahead, Jackie.
I was going to say, how have your relationships transformed as you have transformed?
Yeah, really great question. So love life, pending.
Still transforming.
That's an evolution all in itself. That's just
it's still in the chrysalis. Yeah, it'll get there. But I would say, you know, it's what allows me to do the work that I do today as a coach. It's what it allows me to, you know, connect with people and have that deep level of empathy and compassion, and to be able to not necessarily like step inside of where they are, but to be able to meet them where they are and to allow my vulnerability. You know, that's part of my transformation is being honest and being vulnerable, and transparent about what I'm experiencing, so that it gives people room and space to say, oh, okay, I don't have to be perfect. Oh, okay, I can get through this. And so I think from a business perspective, it's been great. Relationships with my siblings are, for the most part, pretty good. And certainly my dad. I do think that the relationship with my mother, while I am a lot more compassionate and accepting of who she is, I also understand that, you know, I have to meet her where she is, instead of having this like idealistic view that like at some point she's finally going to be like the mother that I've always needed. I have to recognize and accept her for who she is. And because I can accept her for who she is, I also know that I need to set boundaries. And so that's the theme around other relationships too, learning how to set boundaries, learning how to communicate boundaries, and just being open and honest and vulnerable with people.
How are they with your book? Obviously, your mother's still alive, your dad's still alive, and your siblings are still alive. What was the outcome of that? I mean, that's pretty healing in itself as well.
That's a really great question. I don't know that any of them have actually read the book, to be quite honest.
When did it come out? There's still time.
January of 2020. So we're talking about a year and a half now.
Okay.
I know my sister and I are relatively close. I know she still hasn't read it. They all know that it's been written and that it's out there. No one has asked specific details, right? And if they did, I'd just be like, oh, you should grab the book and then we can talk about it. But yeah, that's a surprising thing. Like no one aunts, uncles, you name it. No one has approached me and said, hey, let's talk about what you wrote in here.
But there hasn't been any angry response either then, I'm guessing.
I think no response is a response.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
You have to send them a link to Life Mastery Radio. You have to send them a link to the show. That will start that curiosity. Oh my gosh, I gotta go read this.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know better than anyone that healing has to happen on your own time frame, right?
Yep, that's true.
And every one of those individuals you've named has their own space of healing that has to take place, and perhaps your book to some degree is a threat that it might
push them,
make them face something that they have yet to deal with, and that's a scary thought. That's a scary situation that you would have to then be forced to deal with something that you would rather just forget. So
yeah, which is why I haven't
pushed it.
I haven't forced it. It was just like this was my journey, this was my process, and I can't. It took me 30 something years to get to this place. I have to let them sit with it, and if they choose not to, that's okay as well. That's okay as well.
So now, today, what was the relationship like with your dad throughout your life?
A lot better. Being immigrants and, having a family of four, like my dad worked quite a bit. So he wasn't as like involved in the sense of like, obviously he was in the home. He took care of us, like took us to school and all that other stuff. But for the most part, his involvement was a little less. My dad I think I'm freezing. His mindset was, as long as I can provide for my family, keep, a roof over their head, like I'm doing a good job, which
that's
I know.
My job.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I will say though that, looking back, he, in many ways, just knowing how like the relationship was with my mother, like to the extent that he would try to overcompensate in terms of like taking me places or, just saying, hey, don't, get away from her, like, or, in the sense of like, go to another room so that she'll stop talking or something like that. So there was a level of protection there, but not in the sense of where like, I felt like, okay, I'm daddy's girl and like he's got my back.
Every girl should be daddy's girl, I think. There's a lot to that relationship. So that's good that you guys kept that together, because he didn't know any better. He was just doing what he knew how to do and what he saw his dad do. So that's what he did.
Yeah. And funny enough, he was the first person that I had to forgive, believe it or not. Like he's the one that I thought that I had the good relationship with. But he was the very first person that I was led to forgive. And part of that was also, I had to learn how to forgive my dad, right? And build a relationship with my dad so that I could learn to forgive God and build a relationship with God. My earthly father versus my heavenly father. So yeah.
Very cool. So you're a life coach today, and your purpose is to help people. So how is it that you help people, and who's attracted to your life coaching?
Yeah.
What is it that people are looking for from Sabine?
So it's life and leadership. And so I'm a firm believer that, regardless of your title, right, we're all leaders in some capacity. We all have leadership And so the life piece comes, sometimes, especially I come from a corporate background, when you get a title or when you are in a certain role, like there's a certain persona that you have to take on, and people hide behind these personas, or they hide behind these assumptions of who they're supposed to be. And for me, like the people who do that, they aren't effective leaders, and it shows in their teams, it shows in their organizations. And so I use the life coaching to help people do, focus on those things like vulnerability, integrity, and authenticity, because I believe that if you don't know who you are, if you don't know what's important to you, how can you communicate that to someone else or lead a team for that matter? So I couple the two, where it's really focused on the person of how they're being or who they're being, and then also help them with the tools and the strategies so that, what they do as a manager, what they do as a leader is effective.
That's cool. I look around and I see a complete lack of morals, principles, and values in a lot of people these days. And it's only because they don't know. They don't know. And, when I was a kid, the 10 Commandments were on the wall, and those were what, we lived our life by, and those are gone now. And
yeah.
It's really cool that you carry that on. I think that teaching people morals, principles, and values is our survival.
Yeah.
So it sounds to me like you have another book inside of you about leadership.
Yes.
Is that true?
Believe it or not, the book that I started to write, I had the outline. First chapter in was a book on leaving corporate to start a business. And I was gung-ho, like, okay, I'm going to teach, I call myself a corporate dropout. I'm going to teach other corporate dropouts, how to put the plan in place, and, to make that transition. And as I was writing, I heard Holy Spirit say, you need to write the other book. And I was like, wait, what other book? I don't have another one. And he was like, that's when he was just like, you need to write your story. And that's when I shifted gears. So yes, there is another book there, whether it is that leap to entrepreneurship or on leadership itself. But that's just been on pause as I've, been trying to ride these last couple of years out.
It's pretty common. You don't know how many people Jackie and I interview. We do an interview every week. And a lot of our guests are corporate dropouts, just like yourself. They climbed that ladder. They were hugely successful. And then they came to the point where they realized it's just not worth it.
Yeah.
But
the success wasn't all it was cracked up to be.
The story of the success and the climbing of that ladder is what inspires other people. So it happened for a reason. Just like you, it happened for a reason, as tragic as it was. But now you have a huge voice of making a difference in other people's lives.
Well, and people are going to connect with you through your story, not through the methods or systems that you teach necessarily. It's going to be the story that they connect to. And perhaps that's why God said, you got to do this first, because it's the first step. And I think there was a lot of it that you learned too about how to lead yourself. Right? That there are leadership principles that you have learned along this transformational journey that you've been on that are going to translate to a corporate environment or a self-run business environment or whatever it is, that we all need to understand how to lead our own lives before we can be leaders to others. Would you agree?
Absolutely agree. And the thing that always inspired me, whether it was, people, leaders, influencers, whatever you want to call them, is when I do this to this day, and I didn't even realize I was doing it back then, but I've always done it. When I saw someone that I admired, right, whether they were standing on stage, they were on TV or whatever, I would always question, what's their story? What's their story? Especially like the most motivational, impactful people. I'd always want to know, what is their story? Because I firmly believe and still believe that, in order for you to stand up and be this person, you had to go through some things. And so, I hope that what I do now is kind of, when I do share my story, it's kind of like, wow, she went through all that and this is what she's doing. Oh yeah, I can totally do it. I can totally do it.
That's what it's all about. Yeah. That's so. I heard recently somebody say, well, I don't have a story, and I know her story, and I know her story is You know, there's a lot to it, but yet she doesn't think that her story could impact others or influence others. What would you say to somebody like that?
Yeah. First and foremost, it's the meaning that we attach to the stories, right? And so if we're looking at, I don't know, if we're looking at Oprah, right? And we're like, oh my gosh, she has this amazing story. She's the first Black woman to start, all this other stuff. There's that stage, or that's one form of her transformation, but let's uncover some of the earlier things, earlier challenges that she dealt with. And once you couple that creates a whole new meaning to who the person is. And again, I think it's been said many times here that nothing that we experience or that we encounter is in vain, that it's all like puzzle pieces that are being put together to help us on this path and on this journey. The littlest thing can resonate with someone. And I think just being open to, one, accepting your story, right? Loving your story, whether you think it was grandiose or not. Accepting. I think once we find self-acceptance in our own story, in our own journey, then it becomes so much easier to be like, oh, okay, well, this is what I experienced, and not from a boastful way, or not from from a place of seeking pity or sympathy, but just sharing. I can't, again, and you've probably experienced this, Jackie and Todd, like, I can't tell you how many times it didn't even have to be this deep, right, of my book, but just little things that happened to me when, I was in corporate or whatever. I can relate with people. I'm able to use these stories and these experiences to better relate to people.
Yeah. Well, because I think you stated in your book that a lot of these, the reasons that you did what you did when you were young is because you were seeking for love. You were seeking for approval. You were seeking for connection, to be part of something. Right. And we make so many mistakes when that is our objective, but we get into leadership positions, and many times we are starry-eyed by the popularity that we start to gain, and then we lose sight of why we're leading, and we start to just do it to be accepted, to be liked, to be loved, to be popular, to have all these likes or a big list or whatever the case might be. That's really not leadership, right? And so that's a part of your story that can play into that particular audience that you're talking to, of corporate bigwigs, to say it's not the popularity that's going to win you the leadership award. It's the impact that you have on the lives of those people who you're leading, right?
Yeah. And in fact, if you don't deal with that longing to be accepted, that longing to be loved, that is going to hinder your ability. So it's like, you have to, whether, you're in leadership, you have to deal with that, because it's going to show up. It's going to show up, and it's going to mirror back to you in some negative way in whatever environment that you're in.
Yep. Yeah.
Oh my goodness, ladies. We just have about 3 minutes left. Sabine, did you have fun today? Is this a cool show?
It absolutely is. I love it.
Isn't Jackie just about the coolest co-host a guy can have?
She is.
Well, Sabine, you have your own podcast, all right? Tell us a little bit about your podcast.
Tell us.
I do. So it's The Journey to Becoming. Shocker. And so on the podcast, first season, I highlighted my story for those who are new to me. And now I share the stories of other women, women in particular who have become coaches, authors, speakers, who, most of the time we become coaches, authors, and speakers because we've gone through something that we want to share with the world. And so they share their testimony, their journey. And I'm a firm believer that, we always see people at their mountaintops, like that height of success, or however we've defined it. But there are a lot of valleys that happen before they can get there. And so I want to do like I'm doing now, right? Expose the truth so that people can see the full picture. So if you're in a valley, you can know that, valleys are part of the experience. If you're at the mountaintop, then you can be encouraged with tools and strategies to help you stay there, but also know that when you are back down in a valley, that there's support, that it's temporary. And so the whole Journey to Becoming podcast is, just me doing what I have been doing with my own story, and just sharing the stories of others, and hopefully impacting and giving hope to others on their journeys.
I'm
You
so
need to
glad
put
you are.
Jackie on your list. Put
Yeah,
Jackie
I'll
on
be
your
on your podcast.
Gold.
And then if you see a request from somebody that looks like me wearing a wig, don't blow my cover. Okay? Don't blow my cover. Thank you so much for being on the show today, Sabine. I enjoyed myself. You have such a life-changing story. It's transformational. Totally transformational. Thank you again for showing up as you.
Thank you. Thank you both for having me.
That's about all we have time for today. Check out the newsletter. Jackie will be writing a blog post about today's show. Check out Sabine. The link is on the show page at www.lifemasterradio.net. That's all we have. Lastly, please, please, please make it a great day. It's all about choice. Bye-bye for now.
Thank you for tuning into Life Mastery with Todd Allen, the talk radio show that dives into the science of higher consciousness. Join Todd and his guests weekly at 10 a.m. Pacific Time and learn how to live a peaceful life. For more information on Todd and his guests, visit his website at www.lifemasteryradio.net. That's www.lifemasteryradio.net.